Pleased to be joined here by Tal Eslick and Matt Klink on this edition of Central Valley PolitiCast, and we're talking about the thing that has been ongoing for the last few weeks and will continue to be ongoing as long as Democrats continue to postpone these confirmation hearings and these confirmation votes. It's confirmation hearings for cabinet members. We've seen several members go through, but right now we're kind of at this big three of people that are I wouldn't say least likely to go through, but maybe are the most publicly watched as far as how tight of a vote that it can possibly get to go through. That's Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence, technically not a cabinet position. Another technically not a cabinet position, but pretty much is Kash Patel for FBI, and of course to Robert F. Kennedy Jr. for Health and Human Services. Now, getting into what are these hearings, and really it's these senators have an allotted amount of time to speak to it really should be to ask questions to a candidate for these positions that's been appointed by the President of the United States. But it really seems like it's a lot of speaking at them right now. Tal, is that right?
Yeah, no, without a doubt. If you were someone that's had an extra 18 to 20 hours in the last couple of days to watch these hearings, it's a lot of political theater. Um, I don't know if it's actually resonating with the American people, but I do feel like these senators are sort of breathlessly trying to get across all their points in a short period of time. And yeah, the idea being that every word that's spent answering a question is a one less word that the senators can use themselves. It's sort of an interesting exercise because the questions are asked and then they kind of interrupt the nominees almost immediately. So good TV, I guess, if you've got nothing else going on, and obviously important for the country as relates to their roles in the administration should they be confirmed.
Matt, what's the strategy behind going into this questioning? Obviously, it's different if you're a Republican versus a Democrat or whoever's in the majority party, then also the party of the presidency.
Well, look, the strategy for the Trump team is you assiduously over prepare your nominee. You go into the hearing, and any Democratic vote you get is gravy. Republicans don't need any. So you worry about making sure that you can carry 50 votes, because if you have 50 votes, you get Senator J or now Vice President J.D. Vance, who will pull you through like he did with Pete Hegseth. There have been it's been fascinating. There have been some bad precedents that have been set here. One is that I think that there's probably more yelling and screaming and shrieking by Democrats than there ever has been in previous confirmation hearings. And I would imagine that the turnaround for, at the time in the future when we do have another Democratic president, the Republicans will be able to reciprocate and point fingers. That being said, I think Tal was right that there's very little new ground that is trod over here. That this is a foregone conclusion, and really the only debate right now among the three candidates that we've been talking about is, do they have the majority of the Republican caucus to get the votes they need to be confirmed? And I would say right now, probably yes.
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing because you have two of these three people are Democrats and have been associated with Democrats in the past, Tulsi Gabbard and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Those are kind of, it seems to be the two that were maybe most up in the air, given Gabbard's past meetings with Bashar al-Assad, and then of course to Robert F. Kennedy's history in progressive politics, and then of course questions about his history on vaccines. It seems like it's an effective. Are they just are a lot of Democrats living in the past for as far as this was effective in 2018 with Brett Kavanaugh and how close his confirmation hearing was to the election? And of course, House Democrats swept through. They won their majority in the House, and a pretty significant majority there too. Is that what they're kind of hoping for? Just this sweep of candidates that are going through that Trump's trying to push through. Let's try and get as much political fodder as we can out there in this hearing. Tal, is that what you're kind of seeing from this?
Yeah, I'd be curious as to what the strategy on the part of Senate Democrats is. For the reasons that Matt just mentioned, Republicans, these nominees, don't necessarily need any Democratic support. So it's been interesting that it feels a little bit lacking of discipline to have the Senate Democrats kind of hit these nominees with, personal issues or things they've said on podcasts and things of that nature. What's been interesting is that you haven't seen Democrats as much try to focus in on those issues that make this a difficult vote for Republicans. I think RFK Jr. is probably the clearest example of that with his past positions on abortion. You saw a little bit of it yesterday, but what we're seeing play out is really that Trump coalition that brought in, I kind of granola moms with the RFK stuff around concern around vaccination and healthy foods, and then also with Tulsi Gabbard with obviously Democrats. Cash Patel is really more of that kind of like flip the table over, burn it down kind of approach to breaking up federal government and kind of looking at things in a different way. So this is just pieces of the campaign that I think are playing out, but it doesn't feel like thus far Senate Democrats are being very tactical about making this an uncomfortable vote for some number of Republicans. If you're a pro-life Republican, not voting for a Republican cabinet secretary who's traditionally been pro-choice, you'd think they would try to drill down on that and make it uncomfortable. But instead, we just get sort of political theater, and as Matt was mentioning, yelling and sort of the gnashing of teeth and banging your hand on the dais. So I don't know. We'll see. I'm not sure if it's going to change the result with that many Republicans in the Senate.
Yeah, well, two quick observations specifically about California. I mean, it's the last gasp of the Democrats of Trump derangement syndrome. And you've heard Mazie Hirono from Hawaii say it. You've heard, Alex Padilla say it, one of California's two, now the senior California U.S. Senator. We heard Adam Schiff say it. They still don't understand. They hate Donald Trump so much that it colors everything that they look at. And the other thing that has struck me here is how far down the pecking order California is. We have two very junior senators. Look, Adam Schiff, California knew what it was getting when they elected him. You're going to get someone who is going to want to go after Donald Trump. And you know what? That works really well when you don't need the president for anything. California is going to have a big ask of Donald Trump coming up. And I don't think that Adam Schiff is going to be the point person in that ask. And Alex Padilla, I mean, Alex is a smart man, and I know he tries hard. His questions have been weak. He's reading off a script. He doesn't sound strong. He sounds condescending, and who quickly gets put in his place by, Pam Bondi was the classic example, about I've given you some homework to do. It's like, give me a break. Really? What are we in fourth grade? So again, California is not, we don't carry the big stick in Congress anymore. We don't, because California is such a blue state. And I think that the congressional delegation is going to have a really, really hard time for the next 2 years.
Yeah, I think when you look at a lot of the questioning, it's one of those things where if the questioning had been focusing on the policy and what you're trying to implement in that Department of Justice for Pam Bondi or Cash Patel running the FBI, just some things that maybe are a little bit concerning. If you focus on that, that's one thing, but it didn't seem like that's where the focus was. It seems like the focus was on character. And Mazie Hirono I know, Matt, you want to make a point here, but Mazie Hirono has been on this crusade since 2018 with Brett Kavanaugh to ask everybody the same questions about if they have any past sexual assault or harassment allegations out against them, or some form of that question. And that seems like, if you're someone who's in a state, regardless of political party, is that the first question you want to know the answer to, when that could probably be put on a document or done internally? I mean, those seem like the kind of questions where people right now are seeing the outcry behind it, which is like, what are these hearings actually for?
Well, these candidates have vulnerabilities. I think that you can easily pick apart, and Tal probably knows this as well or better than I. I mean, Tulsi Gabbard has some vulnerabilities. I find it strange now that we make it the wrong thing to meet with leaders of foreign countries. But that being said, her views on the Section 702 warrants that have been historically used and abused by government, her view on Edward Snowden, where she refused to call him a traitor, upset Republicans. Similarly, RFK Jr.'s support of, not only pro-choice, but actively pro-choice. In the agency, the Health and Human Services Agency, where I think that's going to probably be an issue over the next 4 years. So, I mean, you would think that the Democrats would want to make it as uncomfortable for Republicans to cast that vote as possible, and yet they're going down their ideological lane and ignoring. I mean, they don't. It's like they know that the vote's predetermined, and they're just trying to score points for their newsletter to their constituents.
Yeah, Tal, thoughts on that?
No, it's a very good point so if you're a Republican who had concerns around, the past voting record of former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard or RFK's position as an environmental attorney, that may be an uncomfortable vote for you. However, if Senate Democrats then skewer those folks and attack them and use it as a means to tee off against the president, all of a sudden you're in a position where you can't oppose it because you're not going to put yourself in a position to agree with the very progressive senators on the dais. So it feels like theater, feels like maybe a missed opportunity from a tactical standpoint for the Senate Democrats to be disciplined and make it difficult for their colleagues across the aisle. And I do think it's important that certainly in states where the president won, or in states where you have a senator who's upcoming an election in their sixth year, this does matter more than it usually does. I do think a lot of people are paying attention, and for the most part, you've watched the hearings, and I've watched several hours of them. I don't watch all of each of the hearings, but like most cases, it's not encouraging, right? So most people aren't like, okay, I'm proud of my senator. It becomes this kind of like uncomfortable, angsty sort of thing where they're rushing through a list of questions. It's not appealing for most voters, other than maybe a small subset that are deep into these issues. So I don't understand the idea. And to your question, Will, of like, what is the purpose of this outside of theater? I don't think it's much of anything. The actual policy, what these folks stand to do in their respective roles, whether it's the intelligence community or the sort of cartel that runs American health, it's going to be disruptive. And this is my perspective. These are institutions that are probably in dire need of disruption. Our young people are not healthy. As a country, we are not healthy. Our intelligence community has in many cases run amok. These are institutions that need to be upended. It's time for some uncomfortable conversations. And I think that is a position that many of the American people agree with, that it's not going terribly well. So mixing it up and flipping over the apple cart actually might be timely.
And to follow up on something I had brought up earlier too, which is these delayed votes, because there have been some delayed votes on this where I think some of these Democrats, there's policies where you can technically delay a vote a week or so, or push these off into the distance. Does that help the situation at all? I mean, outside of the fact to maybe space out the hearings, which they're really not spaced out. I mean, we're looking at 3 a day still.
It's the only thing that the Democrats can do. They have no practical way of stopping the vote and confirmation of any of Donald Trump's nominees unless Republicans play along. But the Senate is designed, what is it? I think that the founders referred to it as the saucer that cools the tea. It is designed to slow things down, to give the minority an opportunity to make their voice heard and to demand that there are debates on issues, irrespective of their ability to change said issue. So the Democrats are doing what they can, and that's why John Thune is keeping the Senate in session during the weekend and having long days, because it's not a question of days, it's a question of hours. So, and I think that, Republicans do it when they're in a minority. I mean, look, and this is the advantage of having a system like this. If we didn't, if we do what the Democrats want to do and get rid of the filibuster, all of Trump's picks would be confirmed on day one. They would do one mass vote. They wouldn't shut down. They would have no discussion, and we would become Great Britain, where the majority party literally controls everything and the minority party has virtually no rights.
And moving back to a point that you made too, Matt, earlier, and we want to talk about this for our last few questions, is the role of California in this particular body in the Senate, and we can think about the House as well, but just no leadership positions from really anybody in California. If you look at both chambers, which is quite stark and surprising to see, given how important California is, and could have also have been had Kamala Harris won the election, of course, being from California herself. But what happens, and we've gone over this before too, Matt, but what happens when there's no representation from California in any of these ranking positions within the Republican or Democratic parties?
Well, you don't get a chance to skew, you don't get a chance to influence the agenda. I mean, look, Alex Padilla is more of a workhorse. He actually is a legislator. He knows how to get things done. Adam Schiff is a show horse. If Adam Schiff can't be on Meet the Press or This Week with whomever is hosting that week or some news show, he's not interested in doing it. He is a political animal and he's out to publicize Adam Schiff for better or for worse. So the problem is that when we had Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein, they were there so long that they chaired or were ranking member on really important committees, and they were looked at for institutional memory. No one's looking to Adam Schiff for institutional memory in the United States Senate.
Adam Schiff has come on with us a few times, so we're very happy that he's taken the time with us to speak with us. We haven't always had the same relationship with Alex Padilla, so we want to say we'd love to have him keep coming on. That said, of course, that's an important point to make, given the way he's engaged himself in these confirmation hearings and kind of waiting to see exactly legislatively what he looks like, or if he'll end up being, like you said, Matt, more of a show horse in the Senate. Tal, to you on this same topic. Too, I know that you've worked with David Valadeo, who of course is maybe the most pivotal player as far as, especially now with the House is concerned, as far as getting things through, and working in moderation, trying to work across the aisle and working for situations that can be best for people not only in the Central Valley but across the country as we look at legislation that can and cannot pass. With I think right now it's 218, 215 with two vacancies, and Elise Stefanik's going to be confirmed. You would think sometime in the next few weeks as well. What is the role of California still in the House, even if the leadership isn't there?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, to kind of riffing off what Matt had said, we have two senators that by modern political standards are children, right? I mean, these are guys that will likely serve if they choose to, I suppose, and they're reelected decades. So they still have an opportunity with our two senators, both Schiff and Padilla, to kind of adjust their approach. I feel like it feels a little bit like what we've seen so far is kind of what you'd expect from a very progressive Senate, from a very progressive senators from a progressive state. I think there may be an opportunity. We've seen, pieces of this with the Trump coalition to look at these issues a little bit differently, not assume that you have to be in a particular bucket simply because of your background or what political party you are. I haven't seen that level of sort of creativity. I think the performance for the confirmation hearings is about what you'd expect from our two senators. I hope they can sort of turn the corner. And the same for our California delegation, that we've got a number of folks, I think more on the Democratic side, that have served for a very long time and have a way of doing business that they've kind of always done. The electorate's changing. Many of these issues don't fall along a linear political spectrum, right? You've got folks that are, socially conservative that are super progressive on, I mean, I think the health and human service issues are probably the most clear, that traditionally it's been like you're with big agriculture or big food and you're pro-life. Those are breaking up, right? You have people that are socially progressive and willing to take on industry, but also, want a different tax code. It's so messy, and maybe that's just that there's not two sources of news. Maybe it's Twitter. I don't know what it is, but politicians need to be more nimble, just kind of doing things, with a binary, I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat. I don't think that's the right approach. It needs to be much more surgical. And what we're seeing on television right now, certainly in the Senate, where the average age is probably still, 75 or 80, you're kind of getting what you'd expect. And I'm not sure voters are going to continue to reward elected officials for that going forward.
And last couple questions here. Tal, I'll go back to you on this too. With something else that's interesting, not that LaFonza Butler had served quite as long and maybe resided quite as long in California as Barbara Boxer or Dianne Feinstein, but where does the Senate, I mean, in some sort of way from California, miss female representation in those two seats, because those were trailblazing figures. If you look at the history of the Senate, and now they're gone, and now the focus of Padilla again being a legislative workhorse, then maybe Adam Schiff being the Trump showman. There's a woman's voice that had been in California for some time and really leading the nation, where now that's no longer there.
Yeah, I mean, whether it's in the workforce or certainly politics, I think the closer that we are able to try to represent a community, whether that you're serving from a business standpoint or that you've elected to represent, I think that's a good thing. So the fact that we've got quite a few women and there's no female senators, that, it's probably something worth noting. What's most interesting, though, is the irony of it, right? Is that you have a political party that, especially leading up to 2023, 2024, has focused on really nothing other than the color of people's skin, their gender, if gender exists, those sorts of things. And, ultimately, we've got two gentlemen that are accomplished and have served most of their career in politics. We elected those folks, right, from a very progressive state. So I do think it's the irony of it is not lost on me that if that's all you ever talk about, you're in this constant state of trying to chase this perfect, level of diversity while acknowledging that we're all kind of in it together. It doesn't work well. I'd like to see a female senator representing us because half the people that live here are female. That kind of makes some sense, right? But we'll see. And ultimately, these folks were elected, and it was more of a coronation in their cases. You had an appointment and then an easy reelect, and then Adam Schiff. I mean, he kind of cleared the field ultimately. He ran a pretty strong race, so they won legitimately, as far as I know.
And I don't know if this was the point you were about to make, Matt, but Adam Schiff kind of cleared a woman out of the race by lifting up Steve Garvey as the primary opponent and removing Katie Porter.
It was good politics, and I mean, look, I think that the biggest challenge right now that I'm struck with, particularly in California and in Southern California, where I am, is that for decades, people have voted against their own economic self-interest because of the political label behind the person's name. And whether it was for a local elected official or for a national elected official, um, they have cast votes. And look, I mean, the parts of Los Angeles that went up in flames, those are all Democratic parts. And, a fire doesn't care what political party you are. Um, but my point is that, the agendas of these elected officials, they didn't keep their eye on the ball on the fundamentals of governing. Good streets, fund public safeties, keep my communities safe, make sure we have enough police and firefighters, but they always have money for every pet cause or pet progressive cause that they want to fund. And yet it's the same thing with the schools. Mostly people who are ideologically progressive on school boards, and yet the public schools are terrible. And the same type of people keep on getting reelected. So, at a certain point, and we saw it with Prop 36, you hope that people start to make decisions of, I don't care who you are. I care what you're going to do. And it worked with Prop 36. And again, voters look for cues in how they vote. And the easiest cue is party identification. But I think that what we saw in the last election is it still is important, and there are way more D's than R's in California, but it's less important than it was. If that trend keeps on happening, it's probably bad news for the status quo. But I do think, and Tal, this is where you're in your wheelhouse. I think that the Republicans have an opportunity to deny the Democrats their supermajority status in at least one branch of the legislature, which would at least make them relevant in the policymaking conversation again.
Kyle, your thoughts on that to close?
Yeah, it's a large gap to sort of cross. I'm a declined to state voter, and there's all kinds of folks I think that are willing to set aside what they've traditionally considered when electing elected officials, right? Certainly in Southern California right now, competency does matter, and it's difficult to defend status quo when it's going so poorly, right? So whoever is in charge, if we were living in Alabama, I assume the Republicans would be having some version of the same conversation. Ultimately, it may not be the two political parties. The sort of pipe that you run through to get to elected, isn't necessarily what it once was, right? You have people that can build their own personal brand. You have things that can go viral through social media, and all of a sudden, personality might matter more than in the past the blessing of a political party, right? So I would welcome that, certainly in California. I don't know if I don't know if voters necessarily want to immediately give the power over to Republicans, but I think there's an interest in giving it to somebody else, whoever that may be.
And then that's the way that we plug my own interviews for this week. We were going to do one for our last Assembly District interview, or for the special election. We have 4 candidates. Last one's coming in today. His name's William Brown. That video should be on YouTube right around the same time this one is. He's a libertarian. That's an uphill battle to climb if you have a party affiliation that's not an R or a D, but it'll be worth an interesting conversation. The other interviews with 2 Republicans, Holly Willoughby, who seems to be more of an underdog, and Stan Hellis, who is supported by several folks, including David Valadao, Vince Vaughn, Kevin McCarthy, to name a few. That video is also on YouTube right now, as is the interview with Dr. Chris Cruz Boone, who is the lone Democrat in this race. She's endorsed by the local Kern County Democrats as well, Bakersfield City School District individual. She serves on that board. And that election's coming up next month, or this month, depending on the time you watch this, February 25th. 50% or more, that gets you into the state assembly to fill Vince Fong's old seat, and potentially, it's a Republican-leaning district, eat slightly into one of the supermajorities that's in the 2 bodies in California. Tal and Matt, thank you so much. Appreciate you guys coming on today.
Yeah, thank
Thanks
you.
for having us.